I think this is one of the most catastrophic and downright criminal pieces of propaganda that have been foisted on humanity in the 20th century. The idea of people saving for the future is vilified as the cause of economic problems. Is Apple suffering from the fact that their laptop this year is much cheaper than what it was 10 years ago? Deflation and a drop in prices is just simply economic growth. And the idea that we need to destroy the value of money in order for consumption to happen is astonishingly idiotic. People need to consume because they need to survive. People don't need to consume because they need to keep this magical monster called the economy alive. This notion that we have this god of the economy that we need to sacrifice by destroying our money's value for is truly idiotic. It's absolutely insane that it gets taught in universities. If you were taught this stuff at the university, I'm sorry you got scammed. The only reason anybody could possibly believe something so outlandishly stupid is that they benefit from it. Every single one of them gets paid their salary from inflation.
In this insightful interview on the Bigger Pockets Money podcast, Saifedean Ammous explores the historical evolution of money and argues that the hardest money, i.e. the most difficult to produce or increase in supply, becomes the preferred form of currency in societies. Harder money leads to a lower time preference, encouraging individuals to prioritize future savings and investments over immediate consumption. The main thesis of today's interview highlights is a discussion surrounding the mainstream economic idea that inflation is necessary for economic growth and consumption. Stick around until the end, when Saifedean reveals how the growing adoption of Bitcoin may lead to a transformation in the global monetary system, with Bitcoin becoming the hardest money and potentially driving economic growth and progress. As always, if you're enjoying the content, please consider hitting the subscribe button and giving this video a thumbs up. Turning notifications on will ensure you don't miss out on the best Bitcoin interviews on YouTube. Now, let's jump into today's interview highlights with Saifedean Ammous.
The hardest money wins. Whatever is the hardest thing to produce ends up being used as money. What ends up becoming money is the thing that is the hardest to produce. So we see countless examples. We look at examples of an island in the Polynesian where the island did not have limestone, but a nearby island, which wasn't very near, it required you to get on a boat and go significant distances, they had limestone. So the island that didn't have limestone, which was called Yap, they used limestone as money because it was very expensive to get limestone from the other island to this island. So as long as you had some limestone, you knew that it was very scarce and very difficult for people to make, and so it was a good store of value. It was a good form of money that people were using. You see the example of West Africa where glass beads, they did not have the technology for making glass, and so glass beads were very hard to make, and so therefore glass beads were made as money. Historically, we see all kinds of different goods were used as money, like seashells, rare seashells in particular, salt, cattle, things that are difficult to make. But as these things become easier and easier to make because technology advances, what ends up being used as money are the things that are harder to make. So we moved to the era of metals, which were hard to make, and they were used as money. But then as metallurgy advanced and we started being able to make more and more metals, it was only the precious metals that were used as money. Among the metals, only the hardest metals to make were the ones that are used as money, in particular silver and gold. And then within silver and gold, we also find that the one that ended up being used as money was gold because it is the hardest. It's the hardest to increase the supply of gold. And that comes from the fact that gold is very scarce on Earth to an extent, but more important than the fact that gold is scarce on Earth is the fact that gold is indestructible, which means that as long as it is being produced, it cannot be consumed. So there's no way of consuming gold that stops it from being gold. You heat it, it cools down, it's still gold. You mix it with other things, you can take them out, and it's still gold. So even though our technology for gold production continues to improve year on year, it never is able to generate a very large amount of gold to increase the stockpiles of the gold that exists. In other words, we continue to add onto this growing pile, and that pile never shrinks because we're never consuming the gold. And so therefore, if you look historically, you see that annual production always adds up to around 1.5 to 2% of the global supply per year. So that's the supply growth rate for gold. That's why it ended up being the world's money by the end of the 19th century. I think it's an extremely compelling argument. I've heard no coherent counter argument for why the hardest metal to produce, the metal whose supply is the hardest to increase, the one with the lowest supply growth rate, why that would become the money, other than the fact that this is the most important property in money, or at least one of the most important properties in money. So why not silver? Why not copper? Why not nickel? And the answer is that gold is the one that has the lowest supply growth rate. So historically, we see many examples that support this. We see that when a money that is hard is interacting with a money that is easy in a certain society, the easy money gets destroyed. There's a story of an Irish-American captain who gets shipwrecked on that island and then realizes, wow, those people are using limestones as money. I could use modern technology to produce a lot of limestones and come and buy everything on this island, buy all the coconuts that they have, and make a good fortune. And so he goes and he produces a lot of the limestone. He comes to the island and he's able to get a lot of their coconut, and it destroys the value of the money in the island. So we see these examples over and over and over again. We see it in West Africa. When Europeans started coming to West Africa, they saw that they were using glass beads as money. Europeans could make glass beads cheaply and easily in Europe, so they would fill up entire boat hulls with glass beads, go to Africa, West Africa, and use those glass beads to buy all the resources there. And so Europeans were able to buy everything in West Africa, including eventually slaves. And that's why these beads are known as the slave beads, because they were effectively money that the people of Europe could print and go to Africa and buy everything that West Africans had. And so we see these relationships happen over and over and over again. Easy money gets destroyed when it comes in contact with harder money, simply because people who put their money in the easy money witness the value of that money decline over time, because more and more of it is produced, and the people who put their money in the harder money witness the value of their wealth grow over time, because nobody has an easy way of making more of it. Human progress is inextricably intertwined with the increased hardness of our money. As we advance our technology, we find harder and harder monies. And as we find harder and harder monies, we're able to store our future wealth in these harder monies for the future more effectively. The harder the money, the more likely we are to maintain the value that we store in the money for the future. And so therefore, when we have a process where our money keeps getting harder over time, which is what has historically been the case, we're constantly able to provide for our future at an increasingly efficient rate. We start realizing, oh wow, we can provide for our future. And if we can provide for our future, we start thinking about the future more. We start discounting the future less. And so that's the concept of time preference. Time preference is the degree to which you discount the future compared to the present. And everybody discounts the future compared to the present, because the present is here, it's real, it's certain, you're in it, you need to experience it. Whereas the future is always uncertain. There's always a risk and a chance that the future might not come about, because you could die. And so everybody discounts the future to an extent, but progress and civilization is our struggle to discount the future less and less and less. And therefore that allows us to provide for it more. And so the harder our money, the better we are able to provide for the future, the more we are able to think of the future, the less we discount the future, the more future-oriented we are, the more we progress in civilizational terms. The more we save for the future, the more we accumulate capital. And the more we save and accumulate capital, the more productive we become. And so that's really what lowers our time preference and expands our horizon for economic decision making. Rather than just being animals that focus on satisfying our immediate needs, we curb our animalistic instincts and subjugate them to our mental ability to think about the consequences and about the future. And we prioritize the future. So you don't just do what feels right at the moment, you do what is better for you in the long term. And that's really human progress. So all throughout history, we're moving toward harder and harder money and making our monies harder, which is allowing us to provide more for the future, allowing us to save more, allowing us to invest more, allowing us to bring interest rates down, because interest rates are determined by the degree to which we save or by the degree of our time preference. And so human progress is this process of money getting harder, savings going up in value, capital becoming more available, interest rates declining, people becoming more long-term oriented, and therefore becoming more peaceful, more cooperative, more civilized. That's really the process of human civilization. And that's all of human history up until the early 20th century. And then early 20th century, we take an incredible, inexplicable U-turn and decide to start heading back. If Bitcoin is an alternative to central banks, fiat is an alternative to human civilization itself. The process of human civilization is we constantly move toward a harder money and become more future-oriented and more capital accumulating and more civilized. Fiat money has reversed that because it's taken away from us the ability to use a money that is growing at only 1 or 2% per year, which is gold, and replaced it with monies that grow at around an average over the last 60 years of 14% per year. So we've roughly 10x'd the monetary supply growth rate in the 20th century. 14% per year means that you lose half of the value stored in your money in about 5 years. That's the average globally. So some people obviously have it better, where their money only increases in supply at around 6, 7, 8% per year. And that's, the economies like the US and Switzerland and Sweden and Denmark, the best performing fiat currencies, only increase at around 7% per year. And then, of course, the worst performers increase at 100, 200, maybe 500% per year. Examples like Venezuela and Zimbabwe and Lebanon currently. We see the average is about 14% over the past 60 years. And at 14%, that massively compromises your ability to provide for your future. The future becomes more and more uncertain because you have no easy way for providing for it. Fiat money is money because government says this is money. Government decrees that you need to accept it, and government decides the market value that you can pay for it. So this is the distinction. The distinction is between fiat money and sound money. Sound money is money that emerges out of the market's choice. In other words, people freely choose to use this thing as money, and they freely choose to accept whatever price they want to accept for it. That's sound money. Fiat money, on the other hand, is money that is not about your choice. It does not involve your choice. You do not choose to make it your money. It is enforced upon you by coercion. So the difference is between peace and coercion, really. And the difference is between money that emerges because of its properties, because of its suitability as money, and the money that is imposed upon you because of its suitability to the people imposing it on you. And that's the term for government money, basically.
Saifedean asserts that fiat currency systems erode people's ability to save and invest for the future, ultimately hindering economic progress and civilization. Saving for the future and deferring consumption are essential drivers of economic improvement, as they enable resources to be invested in capital, leading to increased productivity. Lower prices are a natural consequence of economic growth and increased productivity, contrary to the belief that they are harmful to the economy. Saifedean criticizes the notion that destroying the value of money through inflation is necessary for consumption and economic activity, labeling it astonishingly idiotic. He also suggests that economists who advocate for inflationary policies do so out of self-interest, as their salaries may be funded by inflationary measures. Let's jump into the second part of this eye-opening interview, where Saifedean explains how the growing adoption of Bitcoin may lead to a transformation in the global monetary system, with Bitcoin becoming the hardest money and potentially driving economic growth and progress.
No, absolutely not. And I don't just disagree with it. I think this is one of the most catastrophic and downright criminal pieces of propaganda that have been foisted on humanity in the 20th century. The idea of people saving for the future is vilified as the cause of economic problems, when in reality it is the only reason that we can have any form of economic growth. The only reason we have any kind of economic improvement is because people defer consumption, delay gratification, choose to invest their resources, and therefore these resources become available as capital resources for investment, allowing for increasing productivity. So the natural market process is to choose the thing that is the hardest to make, simply because that ends up being money whether we choose it consciously or not, just because it appreciates more over time, so the people who use it as money benefit at the expense of people who don't. So it's natural that money would appreciate in value slightly compared to other goods. Other goods are easier to make. We always make more cars, more homes, more everything every year, more computers every year, and their prices decline compared to money. And that's how it should be. And that's what it is in advanced, technologically important fields. You know, your computer keeps getting cheaper every year. Your phone keeps getting cheaper every year. It keeps getting better and faster per dollar that you pay for it. Is that a bad thing? Has this been detrimental to the computer industry? You know, is Apple suffering from the fact that their laptop this year is much cheaper than what it was 10 years ago? No, it absolutely is not. In fact, it's only getting cheaper because of the increased productivity, and Apple is only becoming profitable because of its ability to offer you better and faster and stronger computers every year. It's simply the process of economic growth. Deflation and a drop in prices is just simply economic growth. We get more things rather than more money, and so therefore the value of the things compared to that money declines. And so for a consumer, for a saver, this is a very good thing. The money that you earn today, you can save it for the future, and then it would appreciate more and more, and that would cause you to be able to buy more with it. So that incentivizes people to save more, and that in turn allows for more capital to be available, which in turn incentivizes people to produce more. And therefore, with the increased saving, we have an increased availability of capital, which leads to an increase in economic growth and an increase in economic production. The increase in the value of money is nothing but economic growth and the process of civilization. And the idea that we need to destroy the value of money in order for consumption to happen is astonishingly idiotic. People need to consume because they need to survive. People don't need to consume because they need to keep this magical monster called the economy alive. This notion that we have this god of the economy that we need to sacrifice by destroying our money's value for is truly idiotic. It's absolutely insane that it gets taught in universities. If you were taught this stuff at the university, I'm sorry you got scammed out of your youth and your money to be taught this stuff. The notion that a decline in prices is detrimental for an economy is completely absurd. And again, we look at the example of the high-tech industry. Everywhere around us, we see prices continue to drop, and we see the industry continue to grow. If you wanted to buy a 10 megabyte hard drive in 1981 or something like that, 10 megabytes of data cost $3,500. Today, you can buy 16 gigabytes of data for something like $10 on a thumb drive. So the cost has gone down more than 1 million-fold or so. And yet we witness enormous growth in the high-tech industry, enormous growth in computing power, enormous growth in the productivity of computing, and enormous drop in the prices. So the process of lowering prices is just the process of economic growth and productivity, and we do not need to be saved from it. In fact, the only reason anybody could possibly believe something so outlandishly stupid is that they benefit from it. And that's why, if you look at all the supposed economists who support this ridiculous idea, you will notice that without exception, every single one of them gets paid their salary from inflation. They are hired by universities that receive their money from governments through inflation. The universities are subsidized both by research money from government and subsidized loans for students who pay their tuition from government. So it's entirely down to self-interest that anybody could possibly believe something so outlandish. Bitcoin is like the end solution to this. It solves it and it stays solved. It fixes it and it stays fixed. We're not going to suffer from this problem forever. It's the one money that ends all money. And the reason for that is that it is the one money that's going to have the lowest supply growth rate ever. The creation of Bitcoin was set in motion and the network continued to grow. But the supply of Bitcoin is fixed, and the total amount of Bitcoin that we have available is completely fixed, and there's no way of making more and more of it. There's no way of increasing the supply that is out there. We are at a point right now where more than 90% of all of the Bitcoin that will ever exist has already been mined. Then the next 100 years or so are only going to have the last 10%, and then the majority of that is in the coming few years as well. So the supply growth is constantly declining, and that in turn means that Bitcoin is built to be a living refutation of the idea that we need prices to rise in order for the economy to work. So the Bitcoin economy continues to grow. The size of the economy and the size of the daily transactions continues to grow in the long term. There's high volatility and oscillation day to day, but if you zoom out, you see that the picture is just continuous growth over time. So the economy continues to grow even though the supply does not grow. So if I were a mainstream economist who believes that we need an increase in the money supply in order for the economy to grow, I'd be asking myself questions at this point. But of course, if you wouldn't make it as a mainstream economist if you were honest enough to ask yourself questions. You have to just basically repeat what the central bank pays you to say. And so that doesn't include asking honest questions. Money is an all-conquering technology. It's not a technology where you can just decide, you know what? I'm going to use this thing. Like if everybody wants to use a Mac and like 10% of people want to use Linux, Linux can survive. But money is different. If 90% of people end up on a form of money, the other 10% are not going to have their own money. They're just going to be destitute and their money is going to be destroyed. It's not optional. You need to choose the technology that is the most suitable for the role, because if you don't, then the money will be destroyed. And what we're seeing is we're witnessing the process of the monetization of Bitcoin, where more and more people are using Bitcoin, and the more people use Bitcoin, we can't make more Bitcoin for them. The only way to meet increasing demand is for the value of the Bitcoin to increase. And so we're witnessing a very rapid rise in the value of Bitcoin and a decline in the value of all other monies. And I think this is a trend that's likely to continue into the long term.
Saifedean believes that Bitcoin's fixed supply and decreasing issuance rate make it the hardest money ever created, challenging the conventional wisdom of inflationary monetary policies. Its decentralized nature makes it resistant to inflation and manipulation, positioning it as a superior form of money for the future. Saifedean's passionate rejection of the idea that inflation is beneficial for the economy is in accordance with other experts on the topic, such as Michael Saylor and Peter Schiff, who also see long-term savings as essential for sustainable economic growth. Finally, Saifedean predicts a continued trend of Bitcoin's adoption and appreciation, and the potential reshaping of the global monetary system in the long term. That's just about it for today's video. If you'd like to watch the full interview with Saifedean, you can find the video link in the description below. See you next time.